The morning of September 11, 2001 changed America's view of the world and our place in it. The events of that day thrust our country into 2 decades of armed conflict and forever changed the lives of those who serve. Stay with us as we revisit 9/11 20 years later.
Just keep have the prompter lowercase. Camera's low.
On September 11, 2001, an unprecedented terrorist attack on American soil shocked the nation and set in motion a 20-year war on terror. Today, in New York City, where the Twin Towers used to stand, the twisted rubble has been replaced with a shining memorial. Simple objects that survived the day put on display, each one now filled with such meaning. And as we remember the 20th anniversary of those events, U.S. forces are leaving Afghanistan, the end of 2 decades of war. Tonight, we reflect on the impact of 9/11 on the American military community, especially veterans of the fight. Thanks for tuning in to this very special 90-minute Veterans Voices. I'm Erin Esquer. We hope you'll join us in this conversation that is so important to the veterans community right now. Call us at 925-313-1170 or send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org.
Good evening. I'm Nathan Johnson. Our show tonight will serve as a remembrance of the events of 9/11, but it will also provide a forum for veterans of the War on Terror to discuss the current events in Afghanistan. I want to welcome our guests to the show, Ken De Braganca, as an eyewitness to the events of 9/11 in New York City, and veterans Mike Hudson, Dan Blakely, and Jason Tuschen, all served in the War on Terror that following day. So we have 90 minutes here to have a conversation about a very significant event that happened 20 years ago. Most of us on Saturday memorialized or remembered the events of 9/11, but we have guests here tonight who will be able to reflect not only on that day, but who will also talk about the events that happened over the next 20 years. I also want to invite our audience, though. This is not just a conversation that we should be having. We want to include you in this conversation. So if you experienced 9/11 in a significant way, if you have been a part of the efforts to rebuild our country or be a part of our military efforts abroad, we'd love to hear from you today. But I want to get the conversation going with Kenny. He's listed there as Ken, but I've known Kenny for many, many years. And I think probably in our early teenage years, spent some time in New York City with Kenny and other friends in New York City, and didn't know until recently, and sitting in his apartment, just how he experienced that day in New York City, 9/11. Kenny, maybe you can get us started with giving us the really impactful story of how you experienced 9/11.
Great, thanks, Nate. I just want to say I'm really honored and deeply humbled to be with the veterans community today. As I say, I remember very vividly the events of 9/11. I was 23 at the time. I lived in Jersey City, so I actually came out of the World Trade Center. I took the train in, walked about 2 blocks east to my office at 1 Chase Madden Plaza, went to the 29th floor. I didn't hear the first plane hit. But I remember recalling seeing paper coming out of the sky with some of my colleagues, and said, what could that be from? Either we thought it was some promo from a plane dropping paper, but we knew that the building that at that height could only come from the World Trade Center. And then I remember when we were watching TV at the time, I didn't know what was going on. When the second plane hit, we were watching CNN, we didn't see it. The feed went black, and all I remember is hearing the explosion. We were on the 29th floor of a 60-floor building. That whole building shook. Our knees buckled. We were told by security to leave the floor. We went outside. Everyone was looking for their loved ones nearby. at the moment that I remember I was outside in the courtyard. One of my colleagues came out and said that her father was on a plane going to DC at the time, and that's been hijacked. So the first time I realized the coordinated nature of the terror attack, and I felt extreme concern, fear. And then within a couple of seconds, I looked up. I had a clear view of the World Trade Center. I was probably 2.5 blocks away. Let's call it 800 feet. I remember looking up, hearing boom, and now your brain and your hearing and your optics of the sight against what's actually happening was just traumatic. So I remember hearing boom, and then seeing it, and then boom, 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 boom. It was like an 18-wheeler hitting on the highway 100 odd times. Immediately, the colleague that was next to me put his hand on my chest, and someone at the end of the block said, "Run!" And then immediately, like the dust cloud hit, and I could tell you, there was fear. I felt tremendous fear. Ran about 100 feet. I was in an open structure. I saw a bench. Hit under that bench. Took the top of my shirt off, put it over my head, and my work bag over my head. And it was 10 o'clock then. Hear the bell of the church, Our Lady of Victory, right next door, just go off 10 times. Ding, ding, and it was complete silence. And it was like an Edgar Allan Poe poem. It was complete silence. People were screaming that we're dead. Just pray to God. And I remember at that time just feeling, I think my mom is going to take this really hard. And I wish I had a family. And I remember like having a kid. I remember like, I wish I did all these things. And I remember helping someone up. After the bell, I helped the lady that was next to me up. We crossed to a restaurant. I remember this restaurant was called Bull Run Restaurant at the time. Fancy Wall Street establishment. I couldn't afford to go there when I was 23 years old. And I remember how dark it was. When I was just actually under that bench, I remember putting my hand up. I couldn't see my own hand ahead of me. And then I remember turning my hand and looking at the light side of my hand, and I was like, oh my God, I can't even see the palm of my hand. It is pitch black. It was like feeling you were in an attic without anywhere to go. Complete darkness. All you hear is the rain of the ash, like a drizzle. I went to that restaurant, like I was saying before, that was a pretty fancy restaurant. We walked in, they had huge buckets of water out, like these 8-liter buckets of water. And everyone just took the white linens off and washed up, and they were so welcoming. And it was extremely traumatic at that time.
Yeah, Kenny, I think I can hear it in the tone of your voice. It's probably very difficult to retell this story, even some 20 years later. So what I'm hearing from you is you were in the World Trade Center just 10 minutes before the first plane hit the North Tower. It was just an average day. You described it before as just a blue sky day and people just going to work. And it immediately became this day of fear for you. You described at one point, and I think we have some pictures that go along with this. You described to me earlier when you told this story, somewhat of a fight or flight response when you were in the restaurant. That I think is just really important because it helps, I think, our veterans community to understand how others also experience similar traumas like combat. Maybe you can say a little bit more about your experience in New York City when you got to that restaurant and the second tower fell.
Sure, Nate, I'd be happy to. So I was I remember very specifically, they had over the loudspeaker just to give us, or over the mic at that restaurant. I remember hearing the late Peter Jennings' voice, ABC, and he said, "We lost the first tower. There's only one tower." And then I remember after I washed up, I was getting ready to go towards the door to walk uptown to just be out of the area. Took a step, I was getting up, and all I remember is seeing people run. again, like that same panic sprint right outside, and then the dust cloud. And then I remember going under the table and taking cover. But I remember people saying, the people in the restaurant said, there are people outside. There are people outside. People are outside. And I honestly thought that there was terrorists outside. So at that time, my fight or flight response was, at that point, fight. I remember being a silverware, took the steak knife off the table above me and said, all right, I'm a banker, but if it has to be go time, it's go time. And I remember feeling that terror and said, okay, well, this is going to happen. If someone comes in here, we're going to defend ourselves and everyone here. And it was extremely traumatic. And that fight or flight, I remember that feeling. And then we obviously realized that there were other individuals that were seeking aid as the second dust cloud came.
I think with hearing this story, I mean, first of all, I'm sitting here and I kind of have chills just like feeling the details of what you were saying, as if I was there. And I'm sitting here thinking, for the rest of us in the room and on the panel who were not physically located in that area, but we're watching it in TV land, to hear your version of the story, just being an eyewitness, it's unfathomable to feel that sense of fear that you had. And so I'm just curious, just kind of bringing others into the conversation now, what were your thoughts? I'm looking at Jason right now. I'm just going to kind of pick on Jason, but kind of as he was talking, but what were your thoughts? Just knowing that you may not have been an eyewitness, but do you feel like, I mean, as he's talking, I almost feel like I want to smell the smells and I can kind of feel the ash in the air. Exactly. Like Jason, how do you feel like you could have connected with this story, just how Ken was telling it and just being and watching it from TV, from wherever you were at the time?
Yeah, I can feel my heart racing hearing the story. I mean, it's emotional. That I remember that vividly at that point. I was at the time assigned to the our national mission force out in Virginia Beach, and the first plane hit the tower. And a buddy of mine from Jersey, who unfortunately passed away August 20th, 2003 in Afghanistan, he came in and he's like, "Wow, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And we got up out of where we were sitting and got in front of the TV watching CNN. We're kind of staring at what happened and like, wow, what the hell's going on with that pilot? And the second plane hit. And then we got there was a calm. It was weird. It was like the first thing anybody said was, "Oh, this is bin Laden." This is, we knew right at that moment that our lives are going to change forever. And we started heading back up to our team room, and that's when we got word about the Pentagon. And it was, it was one of those moments that you never forget the feeling. It was the horror of it and watching what was unfolding before the towers collapsed, and then the towers collapsing. And then once that did happen, the knowing that our lives in this profession were going to be changed forever, and all those years of training we're going to get put to the test and quickly. And I remember, calling my wife at home. I had a newborn, and was just like, "Hey, are you watching the news?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I may be home, I might not. I don't know what's going on, but this is kind of what we signed up for."
So you kind of already knew a mission was getting ready to happen for you.
Well, I mean, we knew nobody was going to sit back on this one. It's you knew this was going to be the whole country going united, going forward. Fix this.
So Dan, I'm kind of interested in hearing your take on it as well. Having served and just knowing, at that moment, where were you at? What were you doing? What were you thinking as well?
Yeah, I'm probably one of the youngest people in this call potentially, and so for me, I was 12 at the time, and I remember being home from school though, and I was homesick, and my dad was actually stationed at Offutt Air Force Base. There just outside of Bellevue, Nebraska, and I remember my neighbor coming banging on the door. He was a general's assistant for the for the entire Air Force Base, and he just happened to not be on duty that day. So he pulled me over to their house. Neither of my parents were home. And I remember the first place that President Bush actually landed after he took off from that children's book reading. I can't remember exactly where he was, but the first place he landed was at Offutt Air Force Base. And so I just remember the entire place being locked down. And, you know, I saw all the images and everything happening on TV, but the second that I saw, you know, troops actually marching through the streets and locking down our neighborhood, that's when I knew how real it was and just how much this was going to affect our entire nation, and that we weren't just, you know, a small piece of the pie in the entire military anymore, but it was going to be everybody. Was, to Jason's point, everybody was going to have a hand in this, that this was going to be something big.
Yeah. Well, there's much more to share. I know, Mike, we didn't even get to hear from you reflecting on that day. And Kenny, I know there's lots more that you didn't even get to really reflect on. But we'll have a lot more time to talk about not only the events of 9/11, but the 20 years that have occurred since then. So when we come back, we will continue this conversation with our panel. But first, we are going to see Veterans Voices correspondent Stephen Burchick interview with the Bay Area 2 Brooklyn Riders who are on their bicycles across the country to commemorate the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and honor the lives of those lost in the attacks and the conflicts that followed.
My name is Steve Burchick. I'm special correspondent with Veterans Voices, and I feel pretty fortunate. I drew a lucky interview today. We'll be interviewing firefighters who are on the 2021 Bay to Brooklyn ride across the country. So let's get going. Our first guest is Dave Lombardo. And Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. It's great to have this opportunity. I've been a active firefighter with the city of Santa Clara out of the San Francisco Bay Area, South Bay, for the last 20 years. Prior to that, I served in the Air Force from 89 to 97, and proud United States Air Force Academy alumni, 93.
Dave, why are you making this ride?
Well, it all started 10 years ago. Well, it started before 10 years ago, but when the ride was first conceived and I had first heard about it through our team lead, Daryl Sales, he was a driver engineer with Santa Clara Fire Department at the time. He was also an instructor in my academy when I got hired back in 2001. I was hired. We started the academy July. Our graduation week, our graduation day was 3 days after September 11th. So it was a very bittersweet time. We were all gearing up to graduating the fire academy and just proud and excited to become firefighters and be on the line. And Tuesday of that finals week of our graduation from the academy, September 11th. So when I found out Daryl was thinking about this, I asked, and he shared with me that it was to connect the communities from West Coast to East Coast and to bring those people with us to New York. And so I was immediately on board. I can't think of a greater way to honor those that have sacrificed for their community than to try to tie together communities from West Coast to East Coast. When we came out 10 years ago, we brought a banner with us. The banner has a silhouette of the United States, and in that banner has the names of the 343 firefighters that died in the towers. We collected patches from all the fire departments that we connected with along the way, and we affixed those to the banner and presented that to our FDNY brothers and sisters. This time, we're bringing a different gift, and it's going to have signatures from all those that we've made contact with across the United States.
Thank you. Want to switch now to Jeremy Provanker. Jeremy, how did I pronounce your name?
Provancher, but it was close.
Provancher, okay. Why are you making this ride? And first of all, tell us a little bit about your background.
So yeah, my name is Jeremy. I just got out of the military about 4.5, 5 months ago. I was in 275 Ranger Regiment, deployed overseas. Like I said, I just got out, so I'm actually going to the Sheriff's Academy right now. Unfortunately, everyone here wants me to do fire, obviously, but with my background, I just figured it's a lot easier to go that route. So I was in the military. I'm just riding for everyone overseas that didn't come back home. I actually have a flag too that I brought to Afghanistan, and it is coming along this ride as well. I'm giving it to every day. I am offering it up to a different rider so they can go ride with the flag one day across the country as well.
So our next guest is Gary Wiley. Gary, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I served in the United States Navy as an air traffic controller in the years 73 through 77. That was my military background. I followed the military. I currently work as a project manager for a company that does a lot of government work. So I'm still, connected that way.
Once again, what is your motivation for participating in this ride?
The sacrifices that were made on 9/11 were a turning point, I think, in our country's history. And as a military veteran and watching first responders and anybody who is willing to serve other people, put other people before themselves, I know firsthand that to serve is to sacrifice.
What was the most challenging day or incident for you on this ride so far?
I think it was, if I recall correctly, we were riding into Fort Dodge, Iowa, and this may not be exactly accurate, but it certainly feels this way, that we had headwinds for approximately 100 miles and head and side winds. And when we finally turned towards town, there was a little bit of relief.
Okay. But did I understand you guys just came through Chicago in the last couple of days?
Yes, we did.
What was Chicago like?
Well, Chicago was fascinating. I grew up in the south suburbs and left when I joined the military, and I have lived in California since then. But to be met by the Chicago Fire Department, I've always had kind of this soft spot in my heart for them. The history of the city and all that. But the escorts taking us through the city, just the reception that we received, and then when we were actually leaving and going into Indiana, the same thing, the escorts. We were told there was a couple surprises for us, and as we're driving through what I would imagine different jurisdictions for different engine companies or whatever, they were out on the side of the road cheering us on. A little detour past Wrigley Field, which again is a place in my heart from my childhood.
Next guest is Kent Clark. Kent, welcome, and give us a little bit of your background.
Well, hi, Steve. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kent Clark, and yes, I lived my whole life with that name, 73 years. I was in the United States Navy from 1968 to 1974, and I was on the rivers of Vietnam in a place called Ha Tien for 18 months. My side joy was joining the Santa Clara Fire Department Volunteer Reserve Division, which I have been a part of for 33 years now. Of that 28, I've been the battalion chief or chief of the volunteers.
Are you the one who's not a two-wheeler on this trip?
I am a four-wheeler. I am the driver, and I try to keep everybody in line. I try to keep them watered. I try to keep them safe. I count noses because the way that we bounce along the highways, I'm usually anywhere between 7 and 10 miles ahead. And on some of these really hot days, we shorten that up. But I make sure that we get them all in, get them hydrated, get them fed if they need something to eat. and then jump on ahead of them and set up and repeat. And we do that 10 miles for a round number, 10 miles at a time for 100 miles. Well, Daryl Sales and I have known each other for pretty well all of my 33 years. And when he decided that he was going to go on this bicycle ride, at that time I had both family and business adventures that would not allow me to go. So I did a rendering of their trip on Google Earth and put it on 11 by 17 sheet of paper, took it back to New York, and we went to Station 10 and we presented it to them with Daryl and Daryl's name on it. But the whole point was that they were going to post that because of the bicycle ride and frame it. So to me, that really meant an awful lot.
I want to thank all four of you for participating today. On behalf of Veterans Voices, the staff at the show, as well as all the veterans that view our show, we really appreciate what you are doing to help commemorate this difficult day.
We are talking with veterans of the War on Terror about 9/11. Want to be part of the conversation? Call us at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@ContraCostaTV.org. We've had a great conversation so far. In fact, you might have heard a little bit of our whispering in between the segment. A lot of reflecting on what happened on 9/11 and just how significant that event was. And we really didn't even scratch the surface with many of our guests, didn't even get to talk to Mike, for example. But I want to move the conversation forward into where this country has been over the past 20 years. Kenny, I know we kind of left off with you as you know, in the restaurant and in the underneath the bench and such, but I know eventually you found your way to a friend's apartment and covered in dust, and he really didn't even know what had happened, or was kind of like, wow, really? But maybe you can walk us through quickly, and I know that's hard to do. How has the city of New York City, and maybe even some of the other areas on the East Coast, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, for example, how have some of these areas recovered or moved forward in the days since 9/11?
Yeah, Nate, I would say, every September, with the summer wrapping up, still warm, but you feel that cool breeze. It's simply a memory muscle for grief, right? You can't help but not remember, what that was like. But I think everyone feels that same way. You're seeing some pictures here. So when I ran, was covered in dust, used some of my shoes. My shoe actually cracked from running. My bag covered in dust. I had walked. My college roommate at the time, he lived by the Empire State Building. So we'd walk like everyone else. There was this pilgrimage. Everyone walked uptown. There was no ferries. There's no subway. I lived in Jersey that I mentioned. There's no path. You were stuck. So you figure it out. Cell phones didn't, work too well. Everyone was jammed. But I think what I take from moving forward was, a year later, I went to that restaurant, Bull Run, and I remember speaking to the manager and saying, I just want to thank you for coming in, letting everyone in that day, basically turning your entire restaurant upside down to help. And he just looked at me and said, would you do the same for me? And I said, absolutely, would do the same. And every September 11th, I go, and now I live downtown the last 8 years. I go to that bench, say a prayer, kneel, kiss it, and the bench is there. It's my son Dan. You don't think any of that. And I was under where he's sitting, and you don't really think you'd have that. So I'm truly grateful for everything that I have. And I think everyone in New York and in the surrounding areas that were impacted all across the country just feel that every day. And I'm truly grateful.
I know there's events every year to remember 9/11, but to what extent do people in New York City, do you even talk about this? Share with others the significance of how that event has impacted your life even today?
I really don't talk about it publicly. It's tough for me to watch any of the documentaries. I live half a mile from the 9/11 museum. I can't muster myself to get a ticket to go. It's tough to watch. I think speaking with like I mentioned, I was in a training program at the time. I was with some individuals. So every 9/11 or it's that bond, and I hear most of the military community talking about it. Just have a bond with people during that time of trauma that you can't can't describe. And two of my close friends, whom I love as brothers, they were deployed. Nate, you know them. They were deployed to Iraq shortly after. I remember going to Camp Pendleton, flying before they deployed, and I remember going there. Just to give them my cross and said to them, I love you, and I want you to return this when you get back.
That's an important piece that you just brought up, because you talked about your friends, right? And then obviously there was a huge military response to what happened. And so now, as Nathan kind of alluded to earlier, talking about what has happened since that actual day. And we know immediately we sprang into action as military service members. So Mike, I kind of want to bring you in the conversation. We didn't get a chance to hear from you earlier, but just kind of wanting to hear a little bit about your thoughts on what happened that day for you, where were you at? And then essentially you as a service member were part of the response. So I'd love to hear from you.
Right. So I wasn't immediately part of the response, which I believe was difficult for us who were in a training command. So I was training Marine recruits at the time, and had a few cycles under my belt there at Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. So I was on the opposite side of the country. I mean, it was a beautiful, clear day. September's, very nice month in San Diego. The exact opposite of what, Ken was going through. Right. So, I mean, I'm in this, it was hard to imagine that was happening. Of course, we had a group of recruits. We had our largest group that we had in a while. We had about 700 Marines graduating that Friday. So 9/11 obviously was on that Tuesday. That Friday, we were due to graduate almost 700 Marines. The air traffic shut down at MCRD San Diego. Normally, you're at the airport basically. The training area there is co-located at the airport. It's on the opposite side of the airport. You hear aircraft all day, and it was silent for 3 days, and that was eerie. But we were still very distant from it. Our security measures totally changed everything. I mean, that was normally a base where you can just kind of. I will say it had very little in the way of security. You can kind of walk it on and off. We welcomed guests there. It was fairly open, and that definitely changed. I had no idea when or if I'd be part of the response. I knew we were going to respond. I knew it was not going to be a quick type of thing. So I just had no idea when. But I will say that Friday, a good friend of mine, graduated from fire academy that week. He's a captain now. He's still a firefighter, and he at that graduation, I didn't realize there was a relationship with the San Diego Fire Department and the Fire Department in New York City, and we had New York firefighters straight from Ground Zero at that graduation. And I shook hands with I was in uniform, and these gentlemen were hoping I was on the next plane to start the hunt for Osama bin Laden. I really wish I was, but I shook hands with those gentlemen, and as Ken would probably tell you, he went over to his friend's house and sought refuge in that apartment, but it probably took him several days to actually clean himself from all the dust and debris. These folks, when I shook hands with that firefighter, he was covered in dust, and he had actually done his best to present himself for this graduation. So I felt that dust from ground zero on my hands, and I realized, all right, this is real. I'm going to be part of this at some point. I didn't know when. I just knew we had to be ready. So that's where I was. But I really felt, in a way, left out. It was a couple of years before I was actually overseas in a war zone. I just felt I wanted to get, like all service members at the time, we just wanted to get what we say, we want to get after it. We want to get involved, we want to make a difference, and we wanted to hit back. I wanted to do it that night. I would just have to wait a couple of years before we were engaged with our enemies.
Yeah, Mike, I remember feeling like you, really excited, but unknowing when the opportunity would be to actually get involved and deploy and be part of this effort. Jason and Dan, I know that eventually the two of you deployed, and Mike, you did as well. Take us a little bit into how this led you overseas and how the mission from reacting to 9/11 maybe transformed over the years into more of maybe a nation building or peacekeeping mission.
Well, so Iraq happened, all right, at the same time. So not at the same time, but 2003 we invade Iraq. So Afghanistan was, in full swing. The hunt for bin Laden was on. He escaped, and so we had this nation building and this hunt for the remnants of Al Qaeda. We had the fight against the Taliban, that type of thing, and then we went into Iraq. So totally different set of circumstances. By that time, I was with our reconnaissance community. I was in training, so that was the thing. You're ready to go, and then of course now you're in training. So we're training, we're getting ready for those specialized missions that we would do, and then here we go to Iraq. So that was confusing for a lot of service members. Iraq has absolutely nothing to do with New York and the Twin Towers. It's a different thing, but you're still fighting some pretty awful people. You're fighting Al Qaeda there. So I was thrilled to finally get over there and start fighting back, but it was still I felt like I belonged in Afghanistan. It would be years later I would finally get to Afghanistan, but my first stop was Iraq. But I did realize that the post 9/11 military was much different. My pre 9/11 days, I deployed pre 9/11 like a lot of people. This was much different. And all of my deployments after 9/11 were all combat deployments. They were all uncertain. They were all, pretty scary. They were pretty intense. I'd say high adventure. And I was just happy to come back. But I was, ready to go again. So we started this continuous cycle of deployment, redeployment, back and forth. So I'm sure a lot of people understand that. We all have multiple deployments over there. But that's kind of where it kicked off for me. I know some of our specialized units, our SEALs, Delta, our Special Operations Forces have been doing combat deployments long before that. But for me personally, that's when it started for me. The back-to-back, and then that constant combat mindset that would last for the rest of my career. It would last all the way till 2018. So basically from 2004, when I first entered the war zone, to 2018, it was pretty much the same thing the entire time.
Yeah, Iraq really kind of threw a curveball in things. Afghanistan, you had a presence there and a continuous presence, and they were engaged in heavy combat. It wasn't a huge footprint. And then Iraq happened, and for certainly the SEAL community and the SOF community, it was a tremendous amount of bodies and resources thrown at that fight. And then on top of that, the things you never heard about were, it truly was a global war on terror. When you go, the world's a big place, and there's, Sunni enclaves, if you will, everywhere. And if they're social or economically depressed, it's a right breeding ground for Al Qaeda adherents. So you think about the Southern Archipelago in the Philippines, or Indonesia, or Bangladesh, or the Horn of Africa. I mean, there's places all over the globe that all of a sudden we had to start paying attention to, and it wasn't just Afghanistan, it wasn't just Iraq. Iraq certainly shifted a ton of the focus away but there was men and women of all branches of service, all over the globe. Some of it wasn't, two-way gun range, but they were doing critical things to help kind of end these Al-Qaeda insurgencies in all these different places.
So for you, Dan, just kind of bringing you into the conversation as well. We know there was a gap, right? You told us earlier that you were 12 years old when the initial attacks happened, but then obviously you made the choice to come in and serve, and then you ended up getting deployed, right? And being a part of the war on terror. So for you, how did you maintain kind of that connection with what happened to when it was time for you to go serve and fight the good fight?
Well, what's interesting, and I know we're about to go to a break here shortly, so I'll keep it short, but 3rd Ranger Battalion was actually the first boots on the ground for a long-term establishment. I know there was CIA and Special Forces that were there in Afghanistan prior to, but really Ranger Regiment was the first on the ground. And we had a heavy presence in Afghanistan until Iraq happened. And once we invaded Iraq, a lot of resources, like Jason said, shifted focus to Iraq. And so when I joined, all of my efforts and majority, I think probably about 75% of the Ranger Regiment was all in Iraq. It was only until years later when it really was starting to get established, the government was getting established in Iraq, that resources were shifted back to Afghanistan. And so there's been this strange, give and take in that region. So I saw both sides of it, the downsizing in Afghanistan, and then obviously the surge that happened in Afghanistan around 2008 through 2012.
Yeah, as we ventured into Iraq and Afghanistan, I know a lot of the focus on why we were in Iraq and Afghanistan started to get lost a little bit in regards to how that related to 9/11. I hope that we can hear from some of our audience. We've heard a lot from both veterans and non-veterans who really experienced this day in a significant way and whose lives were affected going forward. But we know that our audience watching tonight has been impacted by not only 9/11, but the events that have followed that day as well. And we have 2 more segments to discuss tonight's topic. This is a very special 90-minute segment tonight. We'll end at 8:30. So we hope that you can join us either by email or Facebook or by phone and share your experiences of how 9/11 affected you as well. When we return, our panel will continue their conversation. But right now, let's take a look as our vet on the street, Stephen Burchick, asked veterans about 9/11 at a ceremony to commemorate the day in Danville, California.
I'm Steve Burchick, and we're here today at Oak Hill Park in Danville to recognize the 20th commemoration of 9/11. We're going to be asking various people a simple question: how did 9/11 affect you?
My name is Robert Gonzalez. I'm a Vietnam veteran, 1969, the USS Iwo Jima, LTH-2. It affected me profoundly, seeing how many people were affected, the victims and the families, and that's a real tragedy, and it hurts to this day as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Landy. I'm a veteran, Marine Corps, 1969 to 1975. I'm also the adjutant for the American Legion in Danville. And
How did 9/11?
9/11, I was crushed. I mean, I couldn't believe it. How this could happen in a country. And I swore my allegiance to the U.S. and democracy.
My name is Jerry Ihero. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I belong to the Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley. Like most Americans on that fateful day 20 years ago, I was dumbfounded by the events that took place. At first, it was amazement, disbelief, and after I found out who were the attackers, I was angry.
Clayton Chan, Army veteran. 9/11 affected me by obviously the tragedy, the anger, at the same time knowing that a lot of my contemporaries would be serving very soon in harm's way. So I had great concern for them. But on this day of remembrance, we just give honor to those who served and those who perished.
My name is Jim Hill, and today I'm representing the Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley in Danville, California. The day of remembrance, 9/11, affected me. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and it was just devastating to see that somebody would take and fly airplanes with innocent people in it. But I did everything I could to help the local folks and the people that were trapped in LA, because we were expecting an attack there. But yeah, very solemn, very difficult.
Hi, Mark Naveau.
Sandra Sanborn.
9/11 fireman, fire chief on duty, came on duty that day. It was on television. When you saw the pressure, the smoke, we knew we were going to have a long day ahead for those folks. Had friends that responded to Ground Zero, part of the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Team. To the families, the veterans, people who lost loved ones that day, not just first responders, but families that were in the tower. A special reach out to you, acknowledgement. Although it's 20 years, I'm sure it doesn't get any easier. I just want you to know that our thoughts, prayers are with you. Thank you.
We are talking with veterans of the War on Terror, and we want to welcome you to contact us with your questions. Please give us a call at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. We absolutely want to hear from our viewers because we know that we are not the only ones here within the studio and our guests that have had any sort of impact on our 9/11 events. And as we've been talking today and just kind of talking about actual, eyewitness accounts from Ken and then from our military members as well, who are part of the response. We want to definitely welcome any more thoughts from our audience. So, but kind of continuing the conversation, we kind of touched on, Iraq and Afghanistan, Iraq versus Afghanistan, and how over the years, as military service members who've had to serve in both campaigns, and how things might have gotten lost in translation out of the 9/11 events. But I'd like to kind of shift it towards Afghanistan and just starting with you, Dan, because we know that you've had some pretty significant experience there. Just want to kind of shift the conversation to you. I know we've got a few photos and everything that kind of coincide with your time there, but maybe you can kind of touch on that a little bit more for us in the audience.
Sure. So, as Jason alluded to, our first initial presence in Afghanistan was to seek out and destroy Al Qaeda, and really to find Osama bin Laden and eliminate the threat that was flourishing in Afghanistan. Obviously, the Taliban were harboring Al Qaeda and allowing extremist organizations to continue to flourish in the region, and so we really were there to fight and push them back. But it wasn't long. First, maybe 3 to 5 years within the war in Afghanistan that we started to realize that if we were going to continue to push back the Taliban and we were going to continue to try and seek out and destroy all of Al Qaeda, we were going to have to be involved in some sort of nation building. Now, I know that was not the initial intent, but that's what ultimately where we started shifting into. So my years in 2009, 10, and 11 in Afghanistan, I witnessed it firsthand. In 2009, it was very much, us as Rangers were a point raid force. We just seek out terrorists or high value targets or individuals that are associated with high value targets and either, capture or kill them. And that was our initial mission. That shifted my second deployment to where we were then alongside the Afghan National Army, and we were working alongside with them with the same mission set. And then my third deployment was where they were to take point and they were to, take lead on these missions now. And then we were there more as an advise and assist role. So I saw the transition and what ultimately, we were trying to establish in Afghanistan and make sure that they had a fighting force that could continue to fight against the Taliban, that would not allow any terrorist organizations to flourish in the region. And so for me, even 8 years later or 9 years later after I got out, I would have never thought that this would have been the result of our time in Afghanistan. And it's been difficult I know for myself and a lot of other veterans who have fought in Afghanistan, to see kind of what has unfolded in the last couple of weeks.
Before we dive a little bit further into that, because I think we want to spend some serious time discussing the effects of the current events and point out of Afghanistan. But Kenny, real quickly, Dan mentioned, the primary mission in Afghanistan initially was to destroy Al-Qaeda and go after Osama bin Laden. I think it was 2011. I could be off a little bit on my history there, maybe 2012. In which we actually found Osama bin Laden and killed him in Pakistan. How significant was that event to people like you, Kenny, and others in New York City who had survived the terrorist attacks?
I can tell you from that time, I remember it just brought me back. When I heard that news, I could remember calling probably 20 people in 20 minutes of what it felt like for an organized event to coordinate and make that happen. And it felt like I felt some peace and some security. I remember that day, blowing my nose, blood came out of my nose. I remember the dust as we were talking about being covered in it. And it just brought me back to say, it brought us some peace to know that to that extent, that's not going to happen to us again. And I remember just being out on the street and going to Times Square. Everyone was just out, and it just felt like we had a tiny bit of closure from that day.
So significant event that occurred, some 9 years ago, and it brought, sounds like, some justice and some peace to the folks who were directly impacted by 9/11. But Dan, as you mentioned, and Jason, I'd like to bring you into this conversation, and Mike as well, as the mission shifted more towards nation building, and more recently, as the United States ended its mission in Afghanistan, a lot of our nation has really struggled with how they feel maybe about the end of the war in Afghanistan. What not only did the significant events like finding and killing Osama bin Laden, but the events of ending the U.S.'s involvement in Afghanistan, how have those affected you, Jason or Mike?
Sure. There's so many friends that lost their lives, and that's hard to deal with. But it's what we signed up for, and it's a possibility. But it's their families and their children that were left behind. It's a hard one to come to grips with a bit, because you don't want it. I'll never say their sacrifices are vain, but you want to leave a place better than when you got there, whatever it's going to take. And in this case, I don't think we did. And so you see a lot of frustration on, not only the veterans' parts, but especially the Gold Star families who sacrifice more than anybody. And so it's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, to watch it unfold. And in my opinion, all it would have taken is a little bit more planning and in-depth, take politics out of it and just plan accordingly to have a smooth, successful transition out of there. And I felt like we just kind of rushed it.
I agree. I agree with Jason wholeheartedly. When somebody initially enlists in the military or commissions in the military, it's not just them that are taking the oath; it's their families that are going along with them. And it's a really difficult thing when somebody passes overseas. Fighting in a war that ultimately, our nation agreed to or decided to engage in. And it's already difficult to explain this to veterans that, their fight was not in vain. They were doing their job. They knew, what they ultimately volunteered for. But it's difficult for those families to process. And I imagine it's got to be even more difficult for those families to process, like, why did they lose a loved one overseas when they're seeing, to Jason's point, potentially even a worse situation in Afghanistan than when we initially invaded and took control of Afghanistan. The Taliban are arguably more equipped and more capable now than they were 20 years ago. And it's really frustrating and hard to really digest for a lot of veterans, but again, for a lot of Gold Star families as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone's saying. I mean, we knew that nothing really was sustainable in Afghanistan. The second we decided to leave, it would fall apart. I don't think anybody could have totally predicted how that would happen. We just knew it would happen. We never dealt with Pakistan, who really created the Taliban, sustained the Taliban. We just really weren't putting our best foot forward ever to win. Yet the reports the American people were getting were that, we were setting conditions for transition to government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan lead, that sort of thing. And yet we weren't doing the things that would actually need to be done to sustain the Army in the field. They were given equipment they don't need, that it was difficult to maintain. They Black Hawk helicopters. The Marine Corps doesn't even use Black Hawk helicopters because we probably couldn't maintain them. And you think that the Afghans can, and then we set this date to withdraw. Just, okay, we're gonna, some date like that means something. And then I think we all knew that it was not going to be a victory, but we had the opportunity to bring our allies and partners out of Afghanistan and return with honor, right? We failed to return with honor. And that's what, that's what has me in a state of like near rage is our honor has been crushed. And, we might have to go back in Afghanistan. I predict we probably will. And then good luck signing people on to support us. If we need translators, we'll need sustainers, we'll need people to enable us to do our job. Thousands of Afghans, for myriad reasons, volunteered to do that for us, and we left them behind. And that's despicable. I think as a nation, we can do much better. And we owe it to those people to get them out of there. So our focus now is what is our purpose now? The veterans have to come together and side by side with our Afghan brothers and sisters here, fight to reconnect those families. And we're not going to take no for an answer. So yeah, I feel we sacrificed our honor to just meet a timeline, an arbitrary timeline. We're going to feel the impact of that for years to come. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it was just cobbled together at the last second without much thought process on it. But you bring up a great point, Mike, in that, okay, fine, we're pulling out, great, here's a timeline, but have a plan in place to get all those people out that helped us, man. They risked their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, thousands of them, and we just abandoned them. And that's so morally repugnant. It just makes my blood boil. And it's not going to, those we don't get out, it's not going to bode well for them. And it's just it's reprehensible doing that. I don't care if you get out, pull out, fine. I can disagree on that, but we broke it, and those people, were counting on the U.S. to help them get out, and instead, they have this 5-6 year immigrant visa process to get them out, and we didn't have a plan in place to save them. And it was private citizens, and retired vets going in there and doing it on their own, which is, good on them. And I applaud it. And as much as we could help on back here, we did. But, come on, that's like, that is where it's really frustrating, I think, is when you spend time overseas in a combat zone and you realize that there's a handful of really bad people who deserve violence as the only solution. But there's a ton of people who just want to go about their lives, and their kids, they want to have power, they want their kids to have a safe environment, and we abandon them all, and that's terrible.
For me, I just listening to the conversation and what you guys are saying there, you guys brought up some interesting points there, and that's something we can probably discuss in our next segment as well. just about the fact that there are, there's friends versus foes. And you guys have had firsthand experience with the friends and the fact that there were people that were over there that did help. And now, there's that sense of abandonment. And I would love to touch on that for our next segment. So when we return, our panel will continue its conversation about the war on terror. And right now, let's take a lighter look at military news with this month's Scuttlebutt.
Good evening. I'm your host, Corporal Schmuckatelli, and welcome to a groovy episode of Scuttlebutt. First story. The VA conducts a recent poll across the country, interviewing veterans and their families on the quality of their medical services. It came back with a whopping 100% satisfaction rate, baby. This was made possible thanks to the revolutionary discovery that in order to fix all their past problems, all they had to do was give a crap. Here's a list that shows all their recent improvements. No wait times for appointments, no waiting for reimbursements, clear, concise communication from doctors and staff, and no confusing paperwork. And of course, the one I'm most excited about, community raffles, baby, woo! Listen, even if you just win a pair of socks and not that 20-foot fishing line spool with a high-speed low drag, it's still fun. Fun for the whole family. Wait, just in. Okay, guys, I have to correct the last poll. The numbers are actually not 100. It's 112%, baby. Can't believe it. Woo! Super impressive, guys. Can't wait to see more. On a personal note, I wanted to say that I'm also very impressed with the services being provided to me. I'm especially happy with my new medication, Compliance All.
Call your doctor if you have high fever, stiff muscles, and confusion to address a possible life-threatening condition, or if you have uncontrollable muscle movements.
I can't feel my legs, and I feel great, just like Wally Johnson of Placenta, California. Wally Johnson went to have an elective dental surgery and woke up without both his legs. Ouch, buddy. But the VA turned that frown upside down with free lifetime bowling at a local VA-authorized bowling alley. But only on Friday evenings after 1900. Guests are not authorized and shoes are not included. But he's happy thanks to Compliance All.
Other risks include decreases in white blood cells, which can be serious, dizziness upon standing.
In honor of his service and sacrifice for his nation, Galactic Bowling made a custom animation just for him. Here it is now. Man, I'm just floating over here. Woo! I have to say though, it's a little chalky. Compliance All's a little chalky. Can I get some water? Hello? Man, I am high as a kite right now. I can't feel my tongue. I can't feel my tongue. Is that normal? Guys?
We are talking with veterans of the war on terror. We would love to hear more of your stories or opinions on the 20-year war in Afghanistan. So please give us a call at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. So we are going to continue this conversation. We've had so much enlightenment about what happened on September 11, 2001 and how things have transpired even until present day and just the connection between when it initially happened until what's happening today. And we kind of left off the conversation talking about the fact that, now we're at a point where we're evacuating folks out of Afghanistan. And there were, during the times of service for some of you gentlemen here on the panel, where you actually interacted with friendly forces, folks that you guys absolutely leaned on and utilized to kind of help bring things along in that country. And now, now there's this evacuation that's happening. And there has been, discussions publicly about the fact that there are people out there that fear whether or not some of those folks are actually friends or foes. It's very hard to differentiate the two if you haven't been in that situation or that arena. So I kind of want to bring it back to you, Jason, because you've definitely had some firsthand, experience with this, and just kind of touch upon that again, just differentiating between the fact that there truly were friendly forces and not all of them were foes.
Oh, completely. I mean, the vast majority, I think, were, neutral or waiting on the sidelines to see, which side would win. And then there was a ton that were actively wanted to help us, and wanted to do their part. And they had their own vision for a democratic republic in Iraq or one in Afghanistan, and they wanted to contribute to that. And I think like Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, it's a counterinsurgency, right? And so, there's a small segment, Al Qaeda, the Taliban, who want to, shape they have this twisted vision of the world, and we're there to help, make sure that doesn't happen. But a lot of the people are on the kind of the sidelines, like it's almost like a sales pitch, like which side am I going to go with? Because at the end of the day, I'm gonna end up choosing the lesser of two evils because I want to have some semblance of security and safety for my family. But those people that went to, they risked their lives day in and day out. And I can just speak for personally in Iraq with it. You do a 7-month deployment, get after it, and then you go home. Well, those interpreters we had that were Iraqi citizens and everybody else that was working for us, they didn't go, their home was there, and their deployments were 3, 4, 5 years, if you will, nonstop, constantly facing danger. One of the photos you guys had was my interpreter, Johnny Walker. He worked with us day in and day out, every day for 6 years straight. It took 3.5 years to get him out. And this was after his brother was drug out in the middle of the street and shot by Al Qaeda, and death threats, and constantly having to move his family from location to location. You couldn't vet the guy any more than we did. And the process still took forever. And that was when things were kind of calm, if you will. You look at the chaos going on right now in Afghanistan, and how, the vetting process and getting all those people that earned that right to come over here out is it's really challenging right now with the situation as it stands. 2 months ago you could have figured this out, knowing we're going to make this the date and publicly announce it at some point. But in the meantime, have a plan in place to get all those people and their families out to safety wherever it is. But I feel I couldn't say it strong enough that we are morally obligated to do that for them.
Yeah, Jason, I'm so glad you said that, because you're absolutely right. The people that were our interpreters, those even intelligent, like we had people that were working on the ground in an intelligence standpoint that were risking their lives to really give us daily boots on the ground intelligence of where the movement was happening. And they didn't get to go home. They were fighting in their home. Yeah. They were constantly having to move around. We would go for our several month or year long or year and a half long rotation. These people didn't. They were literally fighting for their country every single day for years on end. And for us to say that, we don't owe it to them to get them back here to the US or to one other allied country, wherever it is, just so that they can be safe and look out for their family, it's just so disingenuous and completely against the American way. Like, you want to say that you're there to give freedom to people. Well, who deserves freedom more than the people that were trying to secure it for their own country? And it's just disheartening to see it happen the way that it has in Afghanistan. And Jason talked about it. There's multiple initiatives and veterans and veteran folks that are working to get individuals out of Afghanistan actively. And I'm part of one of those groups to continue to communicate and figure out how we can get them out. And I wish there was a centralized place for people to go. I wish it was very concerted effort across the board, but it's not. Unfortunately, there's multiple organizations all working because they have to. They have to try and find those small factions of individuals to get them out. And I'm just proud of all the veterans who have stood up, and all the even civilians who have stood up to say, let me help, let me get these folks out because they deserve it.
Yeah, support for that has been great. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, the support for that has been great. And to echo that, we greatly appreciate it. That's helped a lot of us personally just find that sense of purpose or redefine that purpose, right? That we feel may have been lost, in recent weeks. So that's, I mean, reaching out to the Afghan community, there's gratitude, real gratitude, and that's local. I don't have to go far. I'm talking about like less than a mile from where I live. There's a large Afghan community, and different parts of Afghanistan. There's Hazara people who are really, really fearful for their lives right now because they're probably the most oppressed minority in Afghanistan. They have a restaurant right down the street. I was there visiting them. All they want me to do is try to help them a little bit, and speak at the Concord Islamic Center. I'll be happy to. And they just just gave me plates of our favorite Afghan food, the Kabuli pullout, the mantu, the stuff that we loved eating over there, the kebabs, just loaded me up and sent me on my way and just treated me like I was family. Those are the Afghan people that we need, that we're trying to help. And those are the folks we've left behind. All of their families are trying to, ask for direction. Where can we go? Who can help us? And then they turn to us. Honestly, what can I do? If I could load up a C-17 with people like, Dan and Jason, we'd go over there and fight our way house to house and bring those people home. We want to say that, right? But what can we really do? Well, Pineapple Express and other groups kind of just did that in many ways. Literally just did that without authorization, and now there's talk about, hey, maybe we can all work together. Just a little late for that because we could have really enabled the military mission to really properly evacuate folks if we would have all been part of that plan at the very beginning. So right now it's all about helping these families in their time of need. And I think we can continue to help people. So there is hope in that sense, but there's a lot of frustration because we have lost any type of leverage over there. There's some diplomatic leverage, but I'm fearful that our government's actually going to apply it and use it properly. I think a lot of people just want to sweep it under the rug, forget about it, tell us to bury our dead, and just go home, and we're not going to do that. We're going to bury our dead, but we're going to continue the mission that they died doing, right? We're going to help the Afghan people, with or without our government's blessing.
I want to move this conversation towards next steps, but before I do, I want to bring Kenny back into the conversation here real quickly, because hearing a lot of frustration from our veteran community that served in Afghanistan, and a lot of hopes that we could have done better. But for the folks in New York City and those that really were directly impacted by this day, are there thoughts that are similar to this, or are there feelings that are similar to this level of frustration, Kenny? Or how are folks in New York City who were impacted by 9/11, how are they feeling about the end of Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sitting, listening to you, similar like I told my story, just hearing this interdependence and like brother that you guys had with folks in order to make those missions successful, as you said, Jason, part of your family, right, outside your immediate family. I mean, for me, just being a civilian, just hearing that, we don't hear everything and feel and experience that. So just hearing that, I think, that touches me. I think to answer your question, Nate, in terms of like how we feel, yeah, I personally, I can only speak for myself. Of course, it looked like it was rushed. It looked like things happened very quickly. We committed to a date, in the same way we planned other type of military campaigns. You'd hope that it'd be planned in the same way, right? With that vigilance, leave no one behind. And it sounds like our troops, as well as those that have helped us, that's how it feels for someone like me in New York. And everything that we did to try to prevent that kind of large scale attack happening again. You don't want to leave any open ends. So that's what it feels like here.
So wrapping this up then, from anyone, how do we move forward in first of all, keeping events from 9/11 from never happening again, and two, ensuring that our actions through our military force are one in which we feel like the mission is accomplished in the end? We only have about 3 minutes, but that's a big question for anyone.
I mean, from my perspective, I think just one of the things we need to do is anytime you got to have a very candid, frank, kind of lessons learned discussion at the highest levels of government. And, we may need to rethink, this country has so many brilliant men and women. And I just feel like the leadership in the civilian sector and the military sector, we're not picking the best and the brightest. And I think we owe the American people, we owe the military, we owe all those people we left behind in Afghanistan to have the right leaders in place who, have a clear vision and a clear mission and, have some emotional intelligence and empathetic and care about people. And this just, like Ken said, it felt rushed. It looked rushed. It looked like a fifth grader could have planned it. And we left people hanging. And so, okay, we can't unring that bell. How do we ensure that never happens going forward? And that should be a top to bottom hard look and a hard reset, not just for the military, but those sitting in Washington, D.C. and their seats of power.
I said this in the book that I helped co-author, The 20-Year War, but this generation of warriors, the people who fought in the last 20 years, who are going to be the second greatest generation. The first greatest generation was after World War II because they reshaped America. This generation of veterans that are coming out of America's longest war are going to help reshape America. And you're seeing it in the actions that they're taking in these Allied airlifts and the Pineapple Express and out of getting these people out of Afghanistan, because we know that it doesn't matter. We're going to do the right things because it's the right thing to do. And I'm very proud and excited for a lot of the veterans and American veterans. And I just hope that they can be inspired by the actions that have taken place in the last couple of weeks. And they can take up the mantle to really reshape America to make it better than it has been.
We thank you guys so much. This was such a great conversation today. This ends our panel discussion of 9/11 and its aftermath. So later in the show, we'll show you a list of resources for veterans and those who want to visit the 9/11 Memorial in New York. Now we invite you to hear a veteran's voice. This month's correspondent is our very own Dr. Shauna Springer, talks with author and CEO Jen Satterly.
Shauna Springer here. I'm so pleased to welcome into the studio today Jen Satterly, someone who's widely respected in the military community, who's the co-founder of All Secure Foundation. Now, Jen came into the military community through her role as a director of film and photography for an elite special operations training company, and that's where she met her husband, Tom. She's also the author of the recently released book, Arsenal of Hope. Welcome to the studio today, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so maybe could you start with sharing a little bit about your background as you came into the tribe in the military?
Absolutely. So I started working in film and photography alongside my husband, who was retired at that time, Command Sergeant Major Tom Satterly, and spent about three and a half years doing realistic military training exercises as director of film and photography.
And Tom served in Delta Force, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
So that must have been some interesting footage and some interesting experiences you had with those operators. And you've also done a lot of work around supporting couples and military spouses, including your book, Arsenal of Hope. Can you tell us more about your book?
Absolutely. So Arsenal of Hope really was born out of my own frustration, lack of information, really the struggles that I had as a military veteran spouse. I was new to the world, didn't really understand it. I felt like the military spouses might have some sort of book, some sort of guide on how to best help my husband in what he was dealing with, which was complex post-traumatic stress. And so because the resources were so limited, because I felt so frustrated, and really when you're in the thick of it as a caregiver and a spouse, you're trying your best to stay above water, to keep your spouse above water. And so All Secure Foundation, which is our nonprofit, was really born out of my own struggles and frustrations, which is honestly where my book came from as well, is let me put something together. Let me give the book to other spouses that I wish I had 8 years ago when I met Tom. So really it was born out of our own struggles and the research that we did to get there.
And with the special operations community, with the pace of deployments and the op tempo, as well as I think with police officers, there's kind of a similar thing there in terms of the elasticity that's required to go between two worlds that have a really different set of rules, just a whole different set of assumptions and a different culture. But what's interesting is that you have been part of both worlds, with Tom. And so you've played a role in his healing. And part of your message is that spouses suffer too, and that secondary PTSD is a real thing, and that people are deserving of care and attention. I'd love to give you an opportunity and a platform to share some of what's on your heart on that.
I'm so glad you did, because it's a huge, huge part of my heart. I used to say, put on your oxygen mask, because when you put on your oxygen mask, you're there to help other people in such more of a meaningful and present way. But now I've scratched that and said, put on your oxygen mask just because you deserve to have your oxygen mask on. Whatever you do with it, you do with it. But you are worthy. You are deserving enough to get the help that you need. Secondary PTS, Tom and I go around the country, speak at bases, we speak at posts. We always ask, who's heard of secondary? And we get one hand most often out of hundreds. Yeah. People don't even know it's a thing. They don't even know how war affects them in the home. They don't even know that the soldier's bringing it in, whether they want to or not. Most often it's not a deliberate thing. Or spouses will say, listen, I don't act like my spouse acts, so there's no way I have secondary PTS. It shows up differently for us spouses most often than it does our spouse. So it might not look like my PTS in secondary. It doesn't look like Tom's. And so that becomes very difficult for people to diagnose or treat. And the relief I see on the spouse's face when I say, it's not your fault. This is what's going on with you. And it's an injury. We can get to the other side of it too. Shoulders drop, tears fall, because everybody wants to have a good life. Everybody wants to live joyfully. And we just need help sometimes getting there.
Such a hopeful message. How do you think it shows up differently in spouses from what you've observed?
Most often what we hear and what I personally experienced was depression and anxiety. Those things seem to rise up really high. And so I'll have spouses call that say, I'm on anti-anxiety meds and I've never had anxiety issues in my entire life, or I've never really battled depression. I don't know why I can't shake this, or why I'm isolating from family or friends, or why I'm stopping, doing the things that I normally love to do. I don't find joy in them anymore. And so it shows up a little bit differently. It looks a little bit differently than the typical soldier or service member response, which could be, I see a lot of anger, I see violence, or I see aggression or perfectionism. So just because the symptoms or the signs look differently doesn't mean that it's not present.
Absolutely. It's such an important message. And, if you live with someone who's waking up in the middle of the night, who's getting flooded with anxiety, it becomes a pretty unpredictable home environment for everybody. And that can lead to those feelings of anxiety and depression for other people in the family, to include children, as well as spouses. So the deservingness is also a key thing I really want to highlight, because I think sometimes in the military community, spouses are kind of seen as attached to, the service member. And so it's really important to be very intentional about that message of, you deserve the care. Can you say anything else you really want people to hear based on your experience?
I absolutely feel that our service spouses and families also serve this country. They are an integral part of this nation. And when I thank a spouse for their service, which I do every time, they're totally taken off guard. They try to pass it off to, that's what my husband or that's what my wife does. No, you serve too. You have sacrificed for this country. You're the backbone of this country. You are deserving of help. You are deserving of every bit of self-care, because you have given so much, not only to your spouse, but to this nation. You deserve it. Absolutely. 100%.
100% agree, as you know, and yes. Thank you for being a voice of hope for the community. You're somebody with so much credibility as somebody within the community, as a spouse of an operator. Where can we find more about your book or All Secure? How would you like people to find you?
You can find us at allsecurefoundation.org. There's a contact button that goes directly to me. I field every single email so that you have the security and the safety to know that you can share stuff with us. It stays private. If you want to get in touch with us via social media, we're on all the social media channels as All Secure Foundation. Arsenal of Hope is available on our website, but it's also available at all major retailers.
And I read it and I blurbed it because it was just a really moving story. It's a love story to me of a couple that finds each other again, regardless of so much trauma. So thank you for joining us today for A Veteran's Voice. And I'm excited to get this out to our audience. I think it's a really important message that you shared today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the show tonight. We hope our conversation has provided you with some insight on the events of 9/11 and the 20 years of war that followed. We leave you with some resources for veterans and their families and where to learn more about the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. If you are having difficult thoughts or feelings, there is always someone to talk with who understands. The Veterans Crisis Line is available 24 hours a day. Call 1-800-273-8255, then press 1. TAPS provides comfort, care, and resources to all those grieving the death of a military loved one. Reach them 24 hours a day by calling 800-959-TAPS 8277. Honoring those killed in the attacks is the heart of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum's mission. See the memorials and learn how to visit them at 911memorial.org. Veterans Voices is brought to you in part by contributions from the Veterans Affordable Home Program, serving those who served us, ensuring the American dream for our veterans. The Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans near you. American Legion Post 246, honoring the tradition of the American Legion in Danville. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider's schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra, Costa, so be sure to subscribe. Our next show will air on Monday, October 11th at 7 p.m. We will talk about veterans and the justice system. Be sure to tune in. To all our veterans and their families, thanks for watching and have a great evening.